Rain poured over the military base gate as a young woman in a soaked coat stood silently, clutching her ID. The guard didn't even glance at it. "Ma'am, I said wait outside. This area is restricted." Her lips trembled, not from the cold, but from the humiliation. Moments later, a black SUV screeched to a halt. A high-ranking officer stepped out, his face pale with disbelief. "Who stopped her here?" he demanded. "That's the daughter of the man who built this base." The morning sky over Fort Hensley military base was painted in dull gray. Clouds hung low, heavy with rain, and the wind cut through the air with a sharp, cold bite. At the towering iron gates of the base, a lone figure stood beneath a battered umbrella, her boots splashing through shallow puddles. Her name was Lena Carter. She was in her late 20s, slender but graceful, her eyes filled with a quiet strength. Her coat was modest, worn from years of use, and in her trembling hands, she clutched a brown leather folder. Inside it lay her late father's ID badge and a letter bearing the seal of the Defense Department. It had taken her weeks to gather the courage to come here. This was the base her father, Edward Carter, had poured his life into, a place filled with his designs, his dedication, and his dreams. After his passing, the government had contacted her about finalizing his last project, a memorial blueprint he had been working on in secret. It was meant to honor soldiers who had fallen in the line of duty. But standing here now, soaked to the bone, Lena felt small, smaller than she ever had before. The guard tower buzzed and the main gate creaked open slightly. A tall, broad-shouldered man in uniform stepped out, his expression hard as steel. The name on his tag read Sergeant Miller. His posture was sharp, his tone colder than the rain. "State your business," he barked. Lena stepped forward, offering a polite smile despite her trembling lips. "Good morning, sir. My name is Lena Carter. I have official clearance to enter the base. I'm here to deliver design documents for the..." Before she could finish, Miller lifted a hand, cutting her off mid-sentence. "Ma'am, you can't just walk up here claiming you have clearance," he said, narrowing his eyes. "You're not in uniform, and this is a restricted zone." Lena blinked in confusion. "I understand, but I was told to bring my father's ID in this letter. He worked here for over 20 years. His name was..." "I don't care who your father was," Miller interrupted, his tone laced with impatience. "Show me your ID." She quickly reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small plastic card, handing it over with both hands. The man barely looked at it before scoffing. "This is old, expired. We don't accept this." "It's my father's," she explained softly. "He passed away, but this letter..." "I said it's expired," he snapped again. "And this letter," he added, snatching it from her hands, "doesn't mean anything without verification." He turned the paper over once, twice, then folded it carelessly and handed it back, now damp with rain. A few other guards stationed nearby watched the exchange. One of them, a younger man named Private Lewis, whispered something under his breath, but Miller shot him a glare that silenced him instantly. "Sir, please," Lena pleaded, her voice shaking. "This project is for the memorial in his name. I just need to speak to Colonel Roberts. He knows me." Miller laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. "You think the colonel has time to meet random civilians who show up at the gate with stories? I've heard them all, lady." The rain grew heavier, pattering against her umbrella, soaking her hair and shoulders. Her heart pounded as she realized the man wouldn't even check her documents properly. "I'm not lying," she whispered, her voice nearly drowned out by the rain. "Then you can wait outside until someone decides you're worth their time," Miller said coldly. He motioned for her to step away from the gate. The large iron doors began to close. Lena stood there, frozen, her shoes sinking slightly into the muddy ground. She wanted to argue, but years of her father's teachings echoed in her mind. Stay calm, no matter how unfair life gets. Dignity speaks louder than anger. So she lowered her umbrella, bowed her head slightly, and stepped aside. Her fingers tightened around the letter as she whispered to herself, "I just wanted to honor you, Dad." For a moment, there was only the sound of rain and the metallic hum of the gate locking shut. Then, somewhere in the distance, the deep rumble of an approaching engine broke the stillness. A sleek black SUV came speeding down the road toward the base entrance. The guards straightened immediately, their posture snapping into rigid attention. Miller turned, frowning at the sudden commotion. The SUV came to a halt just a few feet from Lena, splashing water onto the road. The driver's door opened, and out stepped Colonel David Roberts, the commanding officer of Fort Hensley. His coat bore the insignia of decades of service, and his face, though stern, carried an air of integrity and authority. The colonel's eyes fell instantly on the drenched woman by the gate, and then on the folder clutched to her chest. A flicker of shock crossed his face. He froze. And then, in a voice that cut through the rain like thunder, he asked, "Who stopped her here?" The air around the base gate turned heavy. Even the rain seemed to pause its rhythm as Colonel David Roberts stepped closer, his boots splashing through the shallow puddles. Every guard in sight snapped to attention, their earlier ease replaced by stiff anxiety. Sergeant Miller saluted hastily. "Colonel Roberts, sir. Didn't expect you back so soon. Everything's under control here." Roberts' sharp gaze flicked from Miller to the young woman standing in the rain, clutching her soaked folder. Her head was bowed, hair sticking to her face, her coat dripping. Something about her posture struck him, a faint echo of someone he had once known. "Under control?" Roberts repeated slowly, his voice cold and measured. "You call this under control?" Miller hesitated, sensing the shift in tone. "Sir, this civilian showed up without clearance. She claimed to have some connection to the base. I was just following protocol." Roberts' eyes narrowed. He took a step forward and looked directly at Lena. "Miss, what's your name?" Lena lifted her head, her eyes meeting his. They were calm but tired, filled with restrained emotion. "Lena Carter, sir." The name hit him like a bolt of lightning. "Carter?" he repeated softly, as if confirming something impossible. "Did you say Carter?" "Yes, Colonel," she replied. "My father was Edward Carter. I came to deliver his final blueprints for the memorial project." I tried to explain, but before she could finish, Robert's hand came up, not to silence her, but to steady himself. His expression shifted from disbelief to deep respect. He took a slow breath, eyes glistening faintly beneath the rain. "My God," he murmured. "Edward Carter's daughter?" The guards exchanged uneasy glances. Miller looked confused. "Wait, Edward Carter? As in the engineer?" Roberts turned toward him sharply. "The engineer who built this base's entire defense infrastructure," he barked. "The man whose innovations kept thousands of soldiers safe. The man whose designs are still being used in every security system from here to the coast." The colonel's voice rose, echoing across the steel gates. "And you didn't even check her ID?" Miller stiffened, his mouth opening but no words coming out. "Sir, I didn't know." "Of course you didn't," Roberts thundered. "Because you didn't bother to look. You were too busy judging her by her coat and her posture." Lena stood silently, the rain tracing delicate lines down her face. She didn't speak, but her silence carried more weight than any accusation could. Roberts turned back to her, his voice softening. "Miss Carter, I served under your father for 12 years. He was the finest man I ever knew. Strict, brilliant, humble. When he died, this base lost part of its soul." Lena swallowed hard, emotion tightening her throat. "He always spoke highly of you, sir. He said you were one of the few who shared his belief that every soldier deserves dignity." Roberts smiled faintly. He was right about many things. Then, turning sharply to Miller, his tone hardened again. "Sergeant, open that gate, now." Miller fumbled with his keys and unlocked the barrier, his hands trembling. The heavy gates groaned as they swung open, revealing the vast expanse of the base beyond. "Miss Carter," Roberts said, stepping aside and motioning her in with a respectful gesture. "You are welcome here, always." Lena hesitated for a moment, then walked through. As she passed, Roberts offered her his umbrella and saluted her father's ID badge still hanging around her neck. Miller stood off to the side, drenched and pale. Regret carved lines across his face as he muttered, I didn't mean any disrespect, ma'am. Lena stopped, looked at him gently and said, "Disrespect isn't in the words you speak, Sergeant. It's in the eyes that refuse to see." Her tone wasn't harsh. It was calm, almost kind. That hurt Miller more than any reprimand. As Roberts and Lena walked toward the main building, the younger guards whispered among themselves. The legend of Edward Carter was well known, but few had realized that his daughter would one day stand at those gates, humble, unassuming, and yet commanding respect through her quiet dignity. Inside the base, Roberts led her through long, echoing corridors filled with the hum of machinery and distant radio chatter. He guided her to a conference room overlooking the training grounds. "I can't imagine what you went through out there," he said softly as she sat down. "But I promise you this, it won't happen again. Not on my watch." Lena smiled faintly, brushing rain from her sleeve. "Thank you, Colonel. I wasn't angry, just disappointed. My father always believed this base was built on respect. I only hoped it still was." Roberts nodded solemnly. "It is. Or at least it will be again." He opened the folder she had brought and began examining the contents. As he flipped through the pages, his eyes widened. The blueprints were detailed, a complete design for a memorial plaza, engraved with the names of fallen soldiers and surrounded by adaptive lighting that changed colors at sunrise and sunset. "He finished this?" Roberts asked, almost in awe. Lena nodded. "The week before he passed, he said he wanted the light to honor those who never made it home." The colonel exhaled deeply, moved beyond words. He never stopped serving, even in his last days. Outside, the rain finally began to ease. Shafts of light broke through the clouds, scattering across the wet pavement like silver threads. Neither of them noticed the silhouette of Sergeant Miller standing outside the glass door, watching with remorseful eyes. His expression said it all. A man who had been humbled by the weight of his own ignorance. Hours had passed since the confrontation at the gate, but the weight of that moment lingered across the base like a quiet shadow. Inside the command conference room, a warm glow from overhead lamps replaced the gray chill of the morning. The rain had finally stopped, leaving streaks of water glistening on the tall windows. Colonel Roberts stood by the long mahogany table, his hands resting on the blueprints Lena had brought. His gaze drifted over the pages again and again, not just studying them, but reverently tracing the legacy of the man he once served under. Across from him, Lena Carter sat quietly, her coat now dry, her eyes wandering around the room. The walls were lined with framed photographs of engineers, officers, and base commanders, and there, near the far corner, she noticed a picture. Her father, Edward Carter, smiling beside a younger Colonel Roberts during the base's opening ceremony years ago. Her lips curved into a faint, bittersweet smile. "He really loved this place," she said softly, breaking the silence. Even after he retired, he used to sit by his desk and sketch new layouts, talking about how the base could evolve. He said, "Designs should protect lives, not power." Roberts nodded, his eyes distant. "That was your father. A man who saw soldiers not as ranks, but as people with families waiting for them." He looked down again at the blueprints, his voice thickening with emotion. "And even now he's still protecting them. With this." Lena rose from her seat and approached the table, standing beside him. Together they looked at the intricate details of the design. The curved marble walkway shaped like a shield, the rows of memorial lights that would shift from amber at dusk to white at dawn, and the stone arch bearing the words, "To those who stood for us when no one else would." "It's beautiful," Roberts whispered. "He wanted it to face the eastern sky?" "Yes," Lena replied. "He said every sunrise should remind the base that every day is a new chance to serve with honor." Roberts swallowed hard and closed the folder gently. "Miss Carter, this memorial will be built. I'll see to it personally. Your father's name will stand where it belongs, not just in the base S records, but in its heart." Lena's eyes shimmered. "Thank you, Colonel. That means everything." At that moment, a soft knock came from the door. "Enter," Roberts said. The door opened and Sergeant Miller stepped inside, hat in hand, his posture subdued, his usual arrogance gone. His face was pale with humility. "Sir," he said quietly, "I came to apologize to Miss Carter." Lena turned toward him. He took a few hesitant steps forward. "Ma'am," he continued, voice low but steady, "I was wrong. I judged you before I even looked at your papers. That was my failure, not yours. I'm deeply sorry." For a long moment, silence filled the room. The hum of the ceiling lights seemed to stretch the space between them. Then Lena smiled softly. "Apology accepted, Sergeant." Miller looked surprised. "Just like that?" "My father used to say, respect is not given by rules, it's restored by choices. You chose to come here today. That means you've already learned what matters." The sergeant lowered his head. "Thank you, ma'am." Robert stepped closer, his expression firm yet approving. "Sergeant, from this day forward, every guard under your supervision will undergo new training, not just in security but in conduct. We'll call it the Carter Standard. You'll oversee it personally." Miller's eyes widened. "Yes, sir. I won't fail this time." Roberts nodded once. "Good. Because the next person who walks to that gate deserves to be met with dignity, not suspicion." As Miller left the room, Lena turned to Roberts. "That was kind of you." Roberts shook his head. "It's what your father would have done." The day of the memorial's unveiling arrived beneath a golden dawn. The base stood transformed. Soldiers lined the courtyard, their uniforms crisp, their boots gleaming. Families of veterans and engineers gathered around the newly built plaza. In the center stood the Grand Carter Memorial Arch facing the rising sun. Beneath it, a bronze plaque bore the inscription, "Edward Carter, Engineer Visionary, Guardian of the Brave." Colonel Roberts stood before the crowd, his voice carrying both pride and reverence. "Today we honor not just a man but a legacy, one that reminds us that strength begins with respect, and that humility builds stronger walls than any steel." He turned toward Lena, who stood near the front row, her eyes glistening. "Miss Carter, your father's light continues through you, and through this place." She smiled, holding back tears. "He'd be proud, not of the memorial, but of what it stands for." Then, as the crowd watched, the memorial lights flickered to life, glowing warm amber against the morning sun. Sergeant Miller, now standing among the guards, raised his hand in salute. This time it wasn't forced or formal. It was genuine, born of respect. Lena met his gaze and returned the gesture with a gentle nod. The bass band began to play softly, the sound of trumpets and drums rising into the morning air. And for a moment, time seemed to pause. The sun climbed higher, bathing the arch in light. Lena closed her eyes, whispering to the wind, "Dad, your legacy still protects this place." A single tear rolled down her cheek as the light shimmered across the memorial's engraved words. A final reminder that kindness, respect, and honor will always outshine authority. Sometimes, true strength isn't found behind ranks or uniforms, but in the courage to treat others with dignity. The base didn't just rebuild a memorial that day, it rebuilt its heart.